I was standing in my driveway, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up over my property when I saw the bulldozer rolling through my back gate like it owned the place. The barn that my grandfather built in 1952 stood right in its path. The red paint faded, but the structure still solid as the day he finished it. I dropped my coffee mug on the gravel and started running toward the machine, waving my arms and shouting at the operator to stop. The guy in the bulldozer cab looked down at me through his dusty window, held up one finger like he was telling me to wait, and then gestured toward a woman standing near a white BMW parked at the edge of my property. She was wearing a beige pantsuit that probably cost more than my truck, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. I changed direction and headed straight for her. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. "That's my barn. This is my property." The woman looked at me with the kind of smile that made my skin crawl, the sort that didn't reach her eyes at all. "Good morning, Mr. Spencer. I'm Deborah Patterson, president of the Ridgeview HOA board. I'm afraid your barn is in violation of several community regulations, and after numerous attempts to contact you about remediation, the board has voted to proceed with removal." I stared at her like she'd just told me the moon was made of cheese. "Removal? Lady, you can't just tear down someone's building, and I never got any letters or calls from you or anyone else." Deborah made a show of flipping through papers on her clipboard. "According to our records, we sent 3 certified letters to this address over the past 6 months. The barn is not in compliance with the architectural guidelines established in 2023, and furthermore, the board has approved a development plan for this area. Your property is zoned for the construction of townhouses under the new Community Development Initiative." My mind was racing, trying to process what she was saying. I had bought this 5-acre plot in Ridgeview, Oregon 3 years ago, right on the outskirts of Portland. It was supposed to be far enough out that I could have some peace and quiet, keep my grandfather's barn intact as a workshop, and not deal with the kind of suburban nonsense I'd spent my whole life avoiding. The HOA had been basically non-existent when I moved in, just a formality on the deed. "I don't care what your records say," I told her, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. "You don't have permission to be on my property, and you sure as hell don't have permission to demolish anything. Turn that machine around and get out before I call the police." Deborah's smile got even colder. "Mr. Spencer, I understand you're upset, but this is all perfectly legal. When you purchased this property, you signed the HOA agreement. The board has full authority to enforce community standards and execute approved development plans. If you had attended any of the monthly meetings over the past year, you would have been aware of these changes." "I work nights as a freight supervisor," I said, my frustration building. "I'm not sitting around at HOA meetings, and nobody told me anything about tearing down buildings or townhouses." She made a dismissive gesture with one perfectly manicured hand. "Ignorance of the regulations is not an excuse. The vote was held. The motion passed. And we have contractors scheduled. This barn will be removed today, and construction on the first phase of townhouses will begin next week. You should have received compensation information in the second letter we sent." I looked back at the bulldozer. The operator had climbed down and was talking on his phone, probably getting instructions. 2 other workers in hard hats were standing near a truck loaded with equipment. This wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment thing. They had planned this. "Get off my property right now," I said, my voice dropping to something dangerous. "I'm not asking again." Deborah's expression shifted to something like pity mixed with contempt. "Mr. Spencer, if you interfere with this authorized work, you'll be in violation of the HOA enforcement clause, which carries substantial fines. I'd suggest you speak with a lawyer if you have concerns, but I assure you, everything here is completely above board." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. If this woman thought she could just roll onto my land and start demolishing buildings, she was about to learn otherwise. The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation as clearly as I could. Trespassing, destruction of property, the whole thing. She told me an officer would be there within 20 minutes. I hung up and crossed my arms, standing between the barn and the bulldozer operator, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Deborah sighed dramatically. "This is exactly the kind of obstruction I was afraid of. The HOA board anticipated resistance, which is why we obtained the proper permits and legal authorization. Your call to the police is a waste of everyone's time." "We'll see about that," I said. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Deborah made several phone calls, speaking in low tones near her car. The construction workers stood around looking bored. I stayed planted right where I was, my eyes never leaving that bulldozer. The barn behind me held decades of memories, tools my grandfather had used, equipment I'd restored, projects I was still working on. The idea of it being reduced to rubble for some cookie-cutter townhouses made my blood boil. When the police cruiser finally pulled up, I felt a small measure of relief. Officer Martinez stepped out, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes and a notebook already in his hand. He looked at the scene, at me, at Deborah, at the construction equipment, and I could see him already regretting this call. "Someone want to explain what's going on here?" he asked. I started to speak, but Deborah was faster. She walked over with her clipboard and launched into an explanation about HOA regulations, approved development plans, and proper legal procedures. She handed him several documents, which he scanned with increasing interest. "And you are?" he asked me when she finally stopped talking. "Zachary Spencer. I own this property. That's my barn, and I never gave anyone permission to touch it." Officer Martinez looked at the documents again, then at me. "Mr. Spencer, did you purchase this property as part of the Ridgeview community?" "Yeah, 3 years ago." "And you signed the HOA agreement at closing?" I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach. "I guess so. There was a stack of papers. My realtor said it was just standard stuff." He nodded slowly. "According to what I'm seeing here, the HOA does have some authority over property modifications and community development. These permits appear to be in order." "Wait, so you're telling me they can just tear down my building?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "I'm telling you, this appears to be a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you believe the HOA is overstepping its authority, you need to take it up with a lawyer, not call 911. I can't arrest anyone for following what appears to be legal process." Deborah looked triumphant. "As I explained to Mr. Spencer, everything here is above board." I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. This can't be legal. They can't just take someone's property. "They're not taking your property," Martinez said. "They're enforcing HOA rules that you agreed to when you bought the place. Look, I get that you're upset, but unless you can show me something that proves this is criminal trespassing or vandalism, there's nothing I can do. This is between you and the HOA board." He handed the documents back to Deborah, gave me a sympathetic look, and walked back to his cruiser. I watched him drive away, feeling completely helpless. "Now then," Deborah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we've wasted enough time this morning. I'll have the crew proceed with the demolition. I strongly suggest you move any personal items out of the barn in the next 30 minutes. After that, we can't be responsible for anything inside." I wanted to argue, to physically stop them, to do something, but Martinez's words were echoing in my head. Civil matter. Get a lawyer. I was outgunned here, at least for the moment. 30 minutes, I said through gritted teeth, and headed for the barn. Inside, I started grabbing everything I could. My grandfather's old tools went into boxes. The workbench I'd been restoring got shoved aside for later. Pictures, blueprints, equipment, everything that mattered. I worked like a madman, making trip after trip to my garage, while outside I could hear the construction crew getting ready. 28 minutes later, I came out with the last box. Deborah was checking her watch. "Cutting it close, Mr. Spencer?" she said. I didn't respond. I just stood there and watched as the bulldozer operator climbed back into his cab, fired up the engine, and began positioning the machine. The blade rose, caught the morning sunlight, and then came down against the barn wall with a crash that seemed to echo across the entire property. Wood splintered, the wall buckled, another hit, and part of the roof collapsed inward. I felt like I was watching a piece of my history being erased, one strike at a time. The barn that had stood for over 70 years was being reduced to debris in minutes. When it was done, when there was nothing left but a pile of broken wood and dust hanging in the air, Deborah walked over to where I was standing. "The cleanup crew will be here this afternoon to haul away the debris," she said. "Construction on the townhouses will begin Monday morning. You'll be receiving updated HOA dues notices to account for the new development amenities. Have a good day, Mr. Spencer." She got in her BMW and drove off, followed by the construction vehicles. I was left standing in my driveway, looking at the wreckage of my barn, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I went inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and tried to think. There had to be something I could do. Some legal recourse, some way to fight back against this insanity. I pulled out the documents from when I'd bought the house and started reading through the HOA agreement I'd barely glanced at 3 years ago. The language was dense and confusing, full of legal terms I didn't understand. But as I read, I started to see what Deborah had been talking about. There were clauses about architectural standards, community development, board authority. It was all there, buried in pages of small print that I'd never bothered to read. I was halfway through the document when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my brother's name, William Spencer. "Hey," I answered, my voice flat. "Zach, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" William and I talked maybe once a month, usually just checking in on each other. He lived in Portland, worked long hours, and we'd grown apart over the years since our parents died. But he was still my brother, and hearing his voice right then made something inside me crack. "The HOA just bulldozed Grandpa's barn," I said. There was a long pause. "They what?" I explained the whole thing, Deborah showing up, the demolition, the police saying it was a civil matter, everything. William listened without interrupting, and I could almost hear his brain working through the details. "And you didn't get any notices about this?" he asked when I finished. "She said they sent certified letters. I never saw them." "Zach, I need you to check something for me. Look at your HOA agreement. Find the section on notification requirements for major property actions." I flipped through the pages until I found what looked like the right section and started reading it out loud. William stopped me several times, asking me to repeat specific phrases. "Okay," he said finally. "Here's the thing. I'm the district attorney for Multnomah County. My office doesn't usually handle civil HOA disputes, but what you're describing sounds like it might cross into criminal territory." I sat up straighter. I'd honestly forgotten what William did for a living. We'd been so distant that I hadn't really thought about his job in years. "What do you mean?" "If they didn't properly notify you, if they falsified records about sending those letters, that could be fraud. If they obtained permits based on false information, that's another issue. And if they demolished your property knowing they didn't have proper authorization, that could be criminal destruction of property. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's worth investigating." "Can you do that?" I asked, hope starting to build in my chest. "I can look into it, but Zach, I need you to understand something. If I get involved, it's not as your brother doing you a favor. It's as the DA investigating potential criminal activity. I have to follow the evidence wherever it leads. If the HOA really did everything by the book, there's nothing I can do." "I understand," I said. "But Will, I'm telling you, something about this whole thing feels wrong. The way she acted, the way she had everything planned out, like she knew I couldn't fight back. Give me the HOA president's name and any information you have. I'll start making some calls. In the meantime, don't do anything else. Don't confront anyone. Don't call the cops again. Just sit tight. If there's something criminal here, I need a clean investigation." After I hung up, I felt like I could breathe again for the first time all day. William said he'd call me back within a few hours. I spent the rest of the morning organizing the stuff I'd saved from the barn, trying not to look out the window at the pile of rubble that used to be a piece of my family's history. Around 2 in the afternoon, the cleanup crew arrived as promised. They loaded the debris onto trucks and hauled it away, leaving nothing but bare dirt where the barn had stood. I watched from my kitchen window, feeling numb. My phone rang at 4:30. William's name popped up again. "I made some calls," he said without preamble. "The permits the HOA obtained were issued by the county planning office 3 months ago. But here's the interesting part. The application listed your property as abandoned and the structure as condemned. Neither of those things is true." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means someone lied on official documents to get those permits approved. That's fraud. I also checked with the post office about those certified letters they supposedly sent you. There's no record of any certified mail to your address from the HOA or any related entity in the past year." I felt anger rising in my chest again, hot and sharp. So they lied about everything. It's looking that way. I'm opening an official investigation. I'll need you to come downtown tomorrow and give a formal statement. Bring any documents you have, your purchase agreement, the HOA paperwork, anything related to the property. I'm also going to need photos of the barn, both before and after demolition. I have pictures from last month, I said. I was documenting the restoration work I was doing. Perfect. Bring everything. Zach, I want you to know this is serious. If we can prove fraud and criminal destruction of property, people are going to jail. But I need your full cooperation, and you need to let me handle this. No vigilante stuff. I won't do anything stupid, I promised. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Deborah's smug face, the way she'd acted like she had every right to destroy something that meant so much to me. If William was right, if she'd falsified documents and lied to get permits, then she'd made a huge mistake. You don't commit fraud to bulldoze a district attorney's brother's property and expect to get away with it. The next morning, I drove into Portland with a folder full of documents and my phone loaded with photos. William's office was in the Multnomah County Courthouse, a big imposing building downtown. I'd never been there before, and I felt out of place walking through the marble hallways in my jeans and work jacket. William's assistant, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s, led me to a conference room where my brother was waiting with two other people, a man and a woman, both in professional attire. William stood up when I came in and shook my hand. All business. Zach, this is Deputy DA Rachel Morrison and Investigator James Chen. They're going to be helping with this case. We all sat down, and for the next 2 hours, I told them everything. They recorded my statement, took copies of all my documents, and asked detailed questions about every interaction I'd had with the HOA. Rachel Morrison seemed particularly interested in the encounter with Deborah, asking me to repeat several times exactly what she'd said about the permits and letters. Mr. Spencer, she said when we were finishing up, based on what you've told us and the preliminary investigation District Attorney Spencer conducted yesterday, we believe there's sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. However, we need to gather more information before we proceed. In the meantime, has anyone from the HOA contacted you since the demolition? No, I said. It's been radio silence. Good. If anyone does contact you, be polite but don't discuss the case. Don't let them know we're investigating. Just tell them you're consulting with a lawyer and refer them to this office. She handed me a business card with her contact information. William walked me out after the meeting. In the hallway, away from the others, he put a hand on my shoulder. How are you holding up? He asked, and for a moment he sounded like my brother instead of the DA. I'm angry, I admitted. But I'm glad you're looking into this. I just want to know why they did it. Why my property? Why lie about it? That's what we're going to find out, William said. I've got Chen pulling records on the HOA board members, the development company they mentioned, the whole network. If there's corruption here, we'll find it. Thank you, I said. Really? He nodded. You're my brother, and they broke the law. That makes this personal and professional. I drove home feeling better than I had since the bulldozer showed up. But when I pulled into my driveway, that good feeling evaporated. There was a notice posted on my front door, an official-looking document on HOA letterhead. I yanked it down and read it. The notice informed me that due to my interference with authorized HOA activities, I was being fined $5,000. Furthermore, I had 30 days to approve the construction plans for the townhouses that would be built on my property, or face additional penalties, including possible foreclosure proceedings. I took a picture of the notice and texted it to William. His response came back in less than a minute. Don't respond. Bring it to Rachel tomorrow. This is evidence. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything. The more I considered it, the less sense it made. My property was at the edge of the Ridgeview community, not in the middle where townhouses would normally go. Why target my land specifically? And why use illegal methods when they could have just tried to pressure me legally? The answer came 2 days later when William called me with an update. We've been digging into the background of your HOA situation, he said. Turns out Deborah Patterson's husband, Michael Patterson, owns a development company called Patterson Properties. Over the past year, the HOA board, which Deborah controls, has been approving development projects exclusively with her husband's company. The townhouses they want to build on your land, that's a $4 million project. So, this is about money, I said. It's about a lot of money. We pulled the building permits for all the projects the HOA has approved in the past 18 months. Every single one went to Patterson Properties. We think Deborah has been using her position as HOA president to funnel development contracts to her husband's company, probably getting kickbacks or profit sharing. Your barn was in the way of a lucrative project, so she found a way to get rid of it. That's corruption, I said. That's corruption and fraud and abuse of power. We're building a case, but it takes time. These investigations have to be thorough. In the meantime, have you gotten any more notices? 3 more fines, I said. They're up to $15,000 now in total, and they sent a letter saying if I don't pay within 10 days, they'll put a lien on my property. William was quiet for a moment. Zach, I know this is hard, but I need you to sit tight a little longer. Every action they take just adds to the case against them. Keep all the notices, don't pay anything, and document everything. We're almost ready to move. How much longer? I asked. A week, maybe 2. We want to have everything solid before we bring charges. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Every day, I came home to new notices, new fines, new threats. The HOA sent letters saying I was in violation of a dozen different regulations I'd never heard of. They threatened to cut off access to community water. They said they'd report me to code enforcement. It was a campaign of harassment, clearly designed to force me into compliance. I kept every single piece of paper. I photographed everything. I stayed in contact with Rachel Morrison, who seemed genuinely outraged by what the HOA was doing. She told me they were building a case that went beyond just my situation. They'd found evidence that Deborah and her husband had been running this scheme for years, targeting multiple homeowners and bullying them into accepting development projects that benefited Patterson Properties. On a Thursday morning, exactly 16 days after the barn was demolished, William called me. "Well, it's happening today," he said. "We've got arrest warrants for Deborah Patterson, Michael Patterson, and 3 other HOA board members. We're also executing search warrants on their homes and offices. I wanted you to know before it hits the news." I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost dizzying. "When?" "Within the hour. The team is getting ready now. Zach, after this happens, you're probably going to get calls from reporters. Refer them to my office. Don't talk about the case. We want to make sure this prosecution is airtight." "I won't say anything," I promised. "Will, thank you. I know you said this was about the law, but I also know you went to bat for me. I won't forget that." "That's what brothers are for," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I spent the rest of the morning pretending to work on organizing my garage, but mostly watching the clock. At 11:15, I heard sirens in the distance. They got closer, then faded. My phone buzzed with a text from William. "Phase 1 complete. 5 arrests made." I wanted to cheer. Instead, I sat down on my workbench and let out a long breath I felt like I'd been holding for weeks. The news broke that afternoon. Local stations were reporting arrests of an HOA president and several associates on charges of fraud, corruption, and abuse of power. By evening, my phone was ringing off the hook with reporters wanting to talk to me. I ignored all of them, just like William had told me to. What I didn't ignore was the knock on my door around 6 in the evening. I looked through the peephole and saw Rachel Morrison standing on my porch, looking professional but tired. I opened the door. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she said. "I just wanted to update you in person. All 5 suspects are in custody. Deborah Patterson tried to destroy documents when we executed the search warrant, which just added another charge. We found extensive evidence of the fraud scheme at her home and at her husband's business. Email records, financial documents, everything we need to prove they were using the HOA as a front for illegal development deals." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we prosecute. The arraignment is Monday. Based on the evidence, I expect they'll all be held on bail. The trial will probably be several months out, but Mr. Spencer, I want you to know this is a strong case. These people are going to prison." She handed me another business card, this one with a different name. This is a real estate attorney who specializes in HOA disputes. Even though we're pursuing criminal charges, you're going to need to deal with the civil side, getting those fines thrown out, probably suing for damages related to your barn. The criminal case will help your civil case tremendously, but they're separate processes. I understand, I said, taking the card. Also, the interim HOA board they replaced Deborah and the others this afternoon wants to meet with you. They're trying to do damage control. You might want to have that attorney present for any meetings. After she left, I sat on my couch and tried to process everything. In the span of 2 weeks, I'd gone from having my property destroyed to seeing the people responsible arrested. It felt surreal. I called the attorney Rachel had recommended the next morning. His name was Gerald Hampton, and he sounded intrigued by my case when I explained the situation. We set up a meeting for Monday afternoon, after the arraignment. The arraignment itself was a circus. I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as Deborah Patterson, her husband, and the 3 HOA board members were brought in. Deborah looked nothing like the confident woman who'd watched my barn being demolished. She looked scared and small, her expensive suit wrinkled, her hair messy. Her husband looked angry, his face red, arguing with his lawyer. The charges were read out: multiple counts of fraud, criminal destruction of property, corruption, falsifying official documents. The prosecutor, Rachel Morrison, argued that all 5 defendants were flight risks given their financial resources. The judge set bail at $250,000 each. I watched Deborah's face go pale when she heard the amount. Good. Let her feel helpless for a change. After the arraignment, I met with Gerald Hampton at his office. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes, and he listened to my story while taking notes. "Mr. Spencer," he said when I finished, "you have an excellent case for damages. The criminal charges actually make this easier. You can use the conviction as evidence in civil court. I'm estimating you could recover the value of your barn, compensation for emotional distress, punitive damages, and all the fraudulent fines they charged you. We're talking potentially several $100,000. "I don't care about the money," I said. "I just want my name cleared and those fines thrown out." "We'll get both," Gerald said. "But you deserve compensation for what they did. Let me handle it." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. The interim HOA board officially voided all the fines against me and issued a formal apology. They canceled the townhouse development project and returned my property to its original status. They even offered to pay for rebuilding the barn, though I told them I'd rather handle that myself once the legal situation was settled. The criminal trial was scheduled for July. William kept me updated on the prosecution's progress. They had so much evidence that 3 of the 5 defendants took plea deals. Deborah and Michael Patterson refused to plead and went to trial. I attended every day of that trial. I wanted to look Deborah in the face and see her have to answer for what she'd done. The prosecution laid out a scheme that had been running for 3 years, involving at least 15 different properties in the Ridgeview community. The Pattersons had made over $6 million from fraudulent development deals, using the HOA as a cover for their corruption. My case was just one example, but it was a dramatic one. Rachel Morrison presented photos of my barn before and after, showed the falsified permits, proved the certified letters were never sent. She called me to testify, and I told the jury exactly what had happened, how I'd watched my grandfather's barn being demolished while the woman responsible stood there smiling. The defense tried to argue that Deborah had believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president, that any mistakes were unintentional. But the evidence was overwhelming. The emails alone showed clear intent to defraud. In one message, Deborah had written to her husband, "The Spencer property will be empty next week. That old barn will be gone, and we can move forward with Phase 3. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came a month later. Deborah Patterson got 6 years in federal prison. Michael Patterson got 8. The 3 board members who took plea deals got probation and fines. I sat in the courtroom and watched Deborah break down crying as the sentence was read. Part of me felt satisfaction. Part of me just felt tired. None of this brought back my grandfather's barn. It didn't undo the violation of having someone destroy something precious on my own property. But it was justice. That counted for something. The civil case was almost anticlimactic after the criminal trial. With the conviction on record, the HOA's insurance company settled quickly. I received $400,000 in damages, plus all the fraudulent fines were officially voided. Gerald Hampton got his fee, and I was left with a check that represented my barn's value many times over. I used some of the money to hire a contractor to rebuild the barn. Not an exact replica. I didn't want to pretend I could recreate what my grandfather had built, but a new barn on the same spot, built with quality materials that would last another 70 years. I involved my brother in the planning, and we spent several weekends that fall working on it together. It was the first time William and I had really spent time together in years. We talked about our parents, about growing up, about the paths our lives had taken. The distance that had grown between us started to close. "You know," William said one Saturday afternoon as we were painting the barn's exterior, "if you hadn't called me that day, none of this would have come out. The Pattersons would have kept running their scheme, destroying people's property and making millions." "I just wanted my barn back," I said. "You got justice instead. That's worth something." The barn was finished in November, just before the first snow. It wasn't my grandfather's barn, but it was mine, and it stood on my property where no HOA president could touch it. The new HOA board had completely restructured, added transparency requirements and oversight. They'd even asked me to join the board, but I'd politely declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics for a lifetime. On Thanksgiving, I invited William over for dinner. We sat in my kitchen, eating turkey and watching the sunset over the new barn through the window. "I've been thinking," William said, "about how close we came to losing touch completely. If this hadn't happened, we might have gone on being strangers who happened to be related." "I know," I said. "I've been thinking the same thing." "I don't want that," he said. "You're my brother. We're the only family we've got left." "So we make more of an effort," I said. "Weekly calls. Maybe I come into the city more often. Maybe you come out here and I teach you how to actually use tools instead of just swinging a paintbrush." He laughed. "Deal." We clinked our beer bottles together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my brother back. The following spring, I got a letter from the Oregon State Bar Association. They were using the Patterson case in ethics training for lawyers as an example of how HOA law could be abused and the importance of proper oversight. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at a conference about my experience. I thought about saying no. I'd moved on from the whole mess, focused on my work and my rebuilt barn and reconnecting with William. But then I thought about all the other homeowners the Pattersons had victimized and the ones who might be dealing with similar situations elsewhere. I said yes. The conference was in Portland, a gathering of lawyers who specialized in HOA and property law. I told my story to a room of about 200 people, explaining what had happened and how easy it had been for a corrupt HOA president to abuse her power. I talked about the importance of reading HOA agreements, attending meetings, and not assuming that authority figures are acting in good faith. After my talk, at least 20 people came up to thank me and share their own HOA horror stories. Some were fighting similar battles. I gave them Rachel Morrison's contact information and told them not to give up. One woman, probably in her 70s, shook my hand with tears in her eyes. "They tore down my garden shed last year," she said. "I thought there was nothing I could do, but hearing your story gives me hope." "Get a lawyer," I told her. "Document everything, and don't let them bully you." That conversation stuck with me for days afterward. My grandfather's barn was gone, but in a weird way, what happened to it had exposed corruption that might have continued for years. The Pattersons were in prison. The HOA system in Ridgeview had been reformed. Other homeowners were fighting back. Something good had come from something terrible. I was working in the barn one evening in May, almost exactly a year after Deborah Patterson had shown up with her bulldozer, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Spencer?" A woman's voice, tentative. Speaking. "My name is Linda Martinez. I was one of the homeowners the Pattersons targeted back in 2024. They forced through a development on my property, and I couldn't fight it. I just wanted to call and say thank you. The restitution from the criminal case is allowing me to rebuild what I lost. I wouldn't have that without you standing up to them." I sat down on my workbench, caught off guard by the emotion in her voice. "I'm glad you're getting something back," I said. "I'm sorry you had to go through it. We all are. But you got justice for all of us. I just wanted you to know that." After she hung up, I sat there for a long time, looking around the barn. It smelled like fresh wood and paint. It was full of tools and projects, the space I'd wanted when I first moved out here. It wasn't the same as what I'd lost, but it was good. It was mine. I thought about calling William to tell him about Linda Martinez's call, but decided it could wait until our weekly Sunday phone call. We'd established a routine every Sunday afternoon. No matter what, we talked for at least an hour. We'd missed too many years to let life get in the way of that again. That night, I stood outside under the stars, looking at the barn silhouetted against the sky. The whole experience had been a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it had given me something to my brother back, a sense of justice, a reminder that standing up to corruption mattered. My grandfather had built the original barn with his own hands, a symbol of hard work and persistence. I'd rebuilt it with the help of my brother as a symbol of justice and family. Different barns, but both meaningful in their own ways. I wasn't naive enough to think all HOA problems would disappear because of one case. But the Pattersons were in prison. The system in Ridgeview had been reformed. Other people were fighting back with new confidence. That was something. As I walked back toward my house, I realized I'd stopped being angry. The rage that had consumed me when I watched the bulldozer tear into my grandfather's barn had transformed into something else, a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served, mixed with gratitude for what I'd regained in the process. The community around me had changed too. The new HOA board was transparent and reasonable. They'd actually started asking homeowners what they wanted instead of just dictating terms. Several of my neighbors had reached out to apologize for not speaking up when the Pattersons were in power, saying they had been afraid of retaliation. I told them I understood. Fear was a powerful motivator. Summer came, and with it came a new project. William and I decided to restore an old truck together, working on it in my barn on weekends. He was terrible with engines, but enthusiastic, and teaching him gave me an excuse to spend more time with my brother. We'd talk about work, about life, about the weird turns fate could take. "You ever think about how random it all was?" William asked one Saturday afternoon, his hands covered in grease as he struggled with a stubborn bolt. "If you hadn't called me that day, if I hadn't been the DA, this whole thing might have gone differently." "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "But you know what? Even if you weren't the DA, I would have kept fighting. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe I would have lost, but I wouldn't have just rolled over." "That's what makes you you," William said, finally getting the bolt loose. "Stubborn as hell." "Runs in the family," I pointed out. He grinned. "Yeah, it does." By the time September rolled around, the truck was running. Not perfect, but running. We took it for a drive through the countryside, windows down, engine rumbling, and for those hours on the road, I felt completely at peace. The legal aftermath continued in small ways. Some of the Pattersons' victims filed civil suits and won settlements. The development company Michael Patterson had run went bankrupt. The HOA's insurance premiums went through the roof, leading to changes in how HOA boards across the state were regulated. My case had become something of a landmark, cited in legal filings and news articles about HOA reform. I tried not to pay too much attention to that. I'd done what I needed to do, stood up for myself, and helped bring criminals to justice. The rest was just noise. In October, I got an invitation to speak at another conference, this one focused on property rights. I accepted, figuring if my experience could help other people understand their rights and fight back against corruption, it was worth the time. The speech went well, and afterward, a young lawyer approached me. "Mr. Spencer, I've been following your case since it broke," he said. "It inspired me to specialize in HOA law. There are so many homeowners getting abused by corrupt boards and not enough lawyers fighting for them. I just wanted to thank you for shining a light on this issue." "Just tell me you're going to be one of the good ones," I said. "I promise," he replied, shaking my hand firmly. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. The barn was still gone, that piece of history I could never get back. But the fight to replace it had exposed corruption, reformed a broken system, and given other people the courage to stand up for themselves. That mattered. The holidays came around again. William and I celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas together, establishing new traditions to replace the ones we'd lost when our parents died. We talked about them often now, sharing memories we'd kept locked away for years. "Dad would have been proud of you," William said one evening. "The way you stood up to those people. The way you didn't back down even when it looked hopeless." "He would have been proud of you too," I said. "Using your position to fight corruption, standing up for what's right even when the people you were going after probably had expensive lawyers." "We're not too bad, are we?" William asked, a slight smile on his face. "Not too bad at all," I agreed. As the new year began, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been almost 2 years since that morning when I'd watched a bulldozer roll onto my property. 2 years since my world had been upended by a corrupt HOA president who thought she was untouchable. The barn standing behind my house wasn't the one my grandfather built, but it honored his memory. The relationship with my brother wasn't the one we'd had as kids, but it was strong and real. The justice system had worked, slowly but surely, to hold criminals accountable and reform a broken system. I'd learned things I never expected to learn about HOA law, about corruption, about the importance of standing up even when you feel powerless. I'd found strength I didn't know I had, and reconnected with family I'd almost lost completely. One evening in February, I was working in the barn when I heard a car pull up. I walked outside to find a couple in their 40s standing in my driveway, looking nervous. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Mr. Spencer, I'm David Thompson, and this is my wife, Sarah. We live about 20 miles from here, in the Oakmont community. Our HOA is trying to tear down our garage to build a clubhouse. We've been reading about your case, and we were hoping you might have some advice." I invited them inside, made coffee, and spent the next hour telling them everything I'd learned. I gave them Gerald Hampton's contact information and Rachel Morrison's, explained the importance of documenting everything, and told them not to let anyone intimidate them. "The most important thing," I said as they were leaving, "is don't face it alone. Get a lawyer, get people on your side. And if you think laws are being broken, contact the district attorney's office. The system can work if you push hard enough." Sarah Thompson had tears in her eyes when she shook my hand. "Thank you." We were starting to think there was no hope. "There's always hope," I said. "It just takes work." After they left, I stood in my driveway looking at the barn. It occurred to me that this would probably keep happening. People dealing with corrupt HOAs would hear about my case and reach out for help. Part of me was tired of reliving the whole ordeal, but a bigger part of me was glad to help. My grandfather had built his barn to be useful, a place where he could work and create and fix things. My barn was becoming something similar, but in a different way. It was a symbol of resistance to corruption, a reminder that ordinary people could fight back and win. That felt right somehow. Spring came again, bringing with it warm weather and new growth. The trees around my property budded and bloomed, the grass turned green. I planted a garden near where the original barn had stood, vegetables and flowers mixed together in memory of my grandfather's practical approach to life. William came out one weekend to help with the planting, and we worked side by side in the dirt, talking about nothing important and everything at once. "You ever regret buying this place?" he asked at one point. I thought about it. The whole nightmare with the HOA, the stress and anger and violation of having my property destroyed, but also the justice that followed, the relationship rebuilt with my brother, the people I'd been able to help. "No," I said finally, "this is home. Even with everything that happened, this is where I'm supposed to be." "Good," William said, "because I kind of like having a reason to get out of the city regularly." We finished the garden as the sun was setting, both of us tired and dirty and satisfied with the work. I looked at the barn, the house, the land stretching around us, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete contentment. The journey from that terrible morning when the bulldozer arrived to this peaceful evening had been long and painful. But I'd made it through. Justice had been served. Corrupt officials were in prison. The system had been reformed. My relationship with my brother had been restored. Other people had been helped. The barn my grandfather built was gone, But something just as valuable had been constructed in its place, not just the physical structure, but a legacy of standing up for what's right, fighting back against corruption, and never giving up even when the odds seem impossible. As darkness fell and William and I headed inside for dinner, I took one last look at the barn silhouetted against the twilight sky. It stood solid and strong, a testament to perseverance and justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people needing help, new battles to fight. But tonight, I was at peace, and that was enough.